All right. And over to you, Kathy.
All right. Thank you very much, Allison. Okay, so let me get started here. And okay, so slideshow from current slide. All right, let me just get that out of the way. Okay, so this is our basic Housing 101 presentation. Um, and I want to start off by introducing the idea of supported housing as a sandwich. And so we can think of our sandwich as having four layers. And our bottom bun is an affordable or subsidized housing, a housing subsidy for affordable housing or, a portable voucher. And the subsidy might be attached to a specific apartment or it might be a portable voucher. And our next layer in our burger is government funded services. Anything you can get the government to pay for, whether that's federal, state, or local. And our condiments are things you have to pay out of pocket. And the top bun is unpaid support from family and friends. Everybody has a sandwich. Everybody's sandwich looks different. What they have in common is we obviously want to try to maximize the bottom bun and the burger so that we don't max out your pocket and what your family and friends are able to handle. Okay, so the good news is that separation of housing from services is best practice. And finding housing is challenging, but it can lead to better outcomes. People can decide who they want to live with. And if the service provider agency is a poor fit, the person can change agencies without moving. And if there's a live-in caregiver and they quit, the caregiver leaves not the person with a disability. Because our overall goal is to have a home, not a placement. And we want to think in terms of a 5 to 10 year roadmap. And depending on where you live, this may go as much as 15 years. But in any case, there are 5 stops on our roadmap. The first is assessing the skills the person has or can acquire, as well as those they're going to need help with or will need to have done for them. And the reason that this is stop 1 on the roadmap is that you can do it before they turn 18. Step 2, ideally you are undertaking between 18 and 22, but not to worry, if your family member is already over 22, it just should be top priority. And this is getting on affordable and subsidized housing waiting lists because they are what drive that 5 to 10 year timeline. Um, so basically the rule of thumb is if you want your person living outside the family home at 30, you really need to start at 18. It's not a matter of, are they ready? They may per se never be ready. My son is per se not ready. He lives in a licensed group home, but he still has a housing voucher. So, um, this is about getting on those waiting lists between 18 and 22. The third stop is applying for other government benefits, and that can also be done 18 to 22. As with housing waiting lists, it can be done after 22. You haven't missed the boat, you just need to get on it. And step 4, you're on your waiting list, you've lined up your benefits, and now we've got this long, slow wait for some kind of housing subsidy. We're not twiddling our thumbs during this time. We are building living skills and identifying systems and supports for the skills the person may not be able to master. And then step 5 is you're at the top of the list and you are ready to move in. You execute your housing plan, you move in, you're generalizing skills and supports to the new setting and add any additional services that are appropriate to the new setting. The reason step 4 is so important is because we want step 5 to be a shakedown cruise, not building the plane while flying it. Okay, so we're not going to panic, we're going to plan. And families need to develop a housing strategy they can implement over time. As the roadmap indicated, 5 to 10 years is not uncommon, and we want to take those concrete steps at 18. And don't wait until it's time to move out, because when you start taking steps, for instance, applying for those housing vouchers, is when the 5 to 10 year clock starts. We're going to talk about what I call the housing equation, which is the rules that govern which government programs can be combined, which cannot be combined, what they can be used for, and where they can be used, because the devil is in the detail. We want to develop assets, aka save money, before 18 if possible, and never in the person's name, although they can be the beneficiary of an ABLE account or a special needs trust. And this is a good place for me to mention that nothing here constitutes legal, financial, or real estate advice. And develop the person's daily living skills, and this will reduce the need for paid support. And you want to build a circle of support around the person. The person needs a village. You are not a village. Mom and dad will not live forever. Okay, so the housing equation is pretty straightforward. It's paying for the housing plus paying for the food plus paying for the supportive services equals your bare bones housing. And we don't want to forget that this does not include spending money, transportation, what the person does during the day. And even in Eastern Massachusetts, supportive services almost always cost more than the bricks and mortar expenses, the housing expenses. And why is that? The easy way to understand this is to realize there are not 40 hours in a week. There are 168 hours in a week. And if your person needs support 24/7, 160 hours a week, it's really expensive really fast. All right, so now we have our funding streams in columns under our building blocks for the housing equation. And you'll notice that some of them are outlined in blue rectangles. And the ones that are outlined in blue rectangles are ones that can be used in all three columns. There are other things that are not in blue rectangles that can only be used for the column they're in. So, for example, a Section 8 voucher can only be used for housing. Food stamps can only be used for food. Mass health can only be used for supportive services. And we're going to talk about these one at a time. So I'm going to start with cash benefits. And again, they can be used for housing, food, or services. And I'm going to talk about three cash benefits. SSI, SSDI, and EAEDC. And SSI and SSDI both come, from the Social Security Administration. SSI stands for Supplemental Security Income. And to qualify, somebody has to be elderly, blind, or disabled. Don't ask me why they distinguish blind from disabled, but they do. And extremely low income with with assets at or below $2,000. And the value of the benefit depends on the person's living situation and what state they're living in. So there is a federal portion of the benefit, and the federal amount of the benefit is governed by the living situation, and that is the same in every state for each of the different situations. And the federal, then there is something else called the state subsidy. And not all states have state subsidies, and different states calculate them differently. So in Massachusetts, the combination of the state supplement with the federal portion of the benefit maxes out between $732 a month and $1,421 a month, depending on the person's living situation. So the lowest amount, the 732, is if a person is living in the family home, and that comprises the federal portion with the state supplement. And then the next level up is 997 a month, and that is somebody who is living in a licensed group home or who is living in a situation where they are sharing expenses equally with the people they live with, whether that's housemates or whether it's family, but they have to be able to show that they can pay their full fair share with $997 a month. And if they can demonstrate that, they can get the $997 a month. If their full fair share would be above the 997, the feds are going to say, nope, you're getting subsidized and we're going to drop you down to the 732. And in calculating that, they are looking at, let's say you own your home, they're going to be looking at the mortgage, the property tax, the property insurance, the utilities, food. And So that's the sharing level. The next level up is $1,081 a month, and that would be a person who's living in an apartment on their own, paying market rate rent, who is not getting subsidized by their family. And how on earth can they pay full market rent? Well, that's where things like housing vouchers come into play. Um, and then the final level is $1,421 a month. And that would be somebody who is living in a licensed assisted living facility. It's extremely rare to find a younger person living in assisted living, but technically speaking, the assisted living statute in Massachusetts covers people with disabilities 22 and up. The challenge is finding an assisted living facility that would admit a younger person. And some of you are probably going, wait a minute, my kid is on SSI and they're not getting that much. Why? Well, that's because if the person on SSI has additional income above $85 a month from any source, that's going to reduce the benefit. And it's going to reduce the benefit by 50 cents on the dollar up to a maximum amount, which is 1/3 of the federal portion of the benefit plus $20. So, what does this look like? Let's say that Johnny is living at home with his parents, and Johnny has a job collecting shopping carts at Stop and Shop, and he makes $100 a month. He is making $15 a month over that 85. He's got to report that income to Social Security every month, and then they will reduce the benefit by $7.50 the following month. Why $7.50? Because it's 50 cents on the dollar of the $15. So it's half the $15. And if Johnny's income was sufficiently high that it was 1/3 of the federal portion of the benefit plus $21, they'd take 50 cents on the dollar off till they got to that last dollar, and you'd get to keep the last dollar. Okay. So one of the great things about SSI is that it automatically, if you are receiving SSI as an adult in Massachusetts, and this is not true in all states, but it is true in Massachusetts, if you are receiving SSI as an adult, it automatically makes you eligible for a Mass Health. And Mass Health is what we call Medicaid in Massachusetts. Anytime you hear Mass Health, I want you to think, oh, that's Medicaid. And why is this so important? Because Medicaid in this country is how we pay for long-term services and supports. If you've ever had an elderly parent go into a nursing home, you may have been shocked to discover that Medicare doesn't pay for the nursing home after, I think, the first 60 days, 90 days, thereabouts. That's because Medicare is only supposed to pay for short-term nursing. For long-term nursing care, the person has to pay out of pocket until they reduce their assets down to that $2,000 and they manage to qualify for Medicaid, at which point Medicaid will pay for the nursing home. Well, our kids aren't in nursing homes, but there are other long-term services and supports for which they are eligible if they are on Medicaid. And that's why being on Medicaid is so important. Um, and so if your person turns 18 and you have them apply for Medicaid, for SSI, and they receive it, if a Medicaid/Mass Health card does not come in the mail within a few weeks, you need to call Mass Health and say, my person is on SSI and is 18 and they have not yet received their Mass Health card. If they tell you that the person should fill out an application for Mass Health, you need to push back. And the reason for that is that if someone is not on SSI, they only become eligible for mass health based on their own income at 19, not 18. But if they are 18, they don't need to apply for it. It's automatic. It comes with the SSI. And if your person's already over 19 and they're just getting SSI now, again, they're not going to need to file an application. You just need to push to get the card. Okay. So moving right along to SSDI. SSDI stands for Social Security Disability Insurance, and it is what we normally think of when we say someone is on disability. And I want to draw your attention to the word insurance in Social Security Disability Insurance. What do we know about insurance? It's something where it pays if you need it, but you have been paying premiums. Well, how are the premiums paid? The money that comes out of your paycheck every 2 weeks, the FICA. Part of what it is paying for is Social Security Disability if you need it. And so what this tells us is that by definition, SSDI is based on a work history. So if your person applies for Social Security and they've never worked, and you, the parent, are not yet retired, dead, or disabled yourself, your person's going to get rejected for SSDI, not because they don't have a disability, but because they don't have a work history. And this is a good place to say there's only one application for Social Security, and Social Security will decide if you qualify for SSI, SSDI, neither, or a combination of the two. And so the work history that is in question for SSDI can be either that of the individual or of a parent who has retired, died, or become disabled. And so how does this work? Let's take a look at Johnny in the shopping carts again. After Johnny has worked enough Social Security quarters, he's going to start to get a small SSDI check based on his own work history. But it's not very big because Johnny doesn't make very much money. And so what happens is Johnny continues to receive SSI, but the amount of SSI he receives is reduced by the amount of his SSDI check. He's still getting the same amount of money, but it's now coming from two different pots of money. Now, let's say a few years go by and one of Johnny's parents retires. And based on that parent's work history, because Johnny has a permanent disability present before the age of 22, Johnny can be considered what's called a disabled adult child, which means Johnny will get an SSDI payment equal to 50% of the parent's Social Security retirement benefit. If the parent's disabled, it'll be 50% of the disability benefit. If the parent dies, it's going to be based on the death benefit. And if that work history, if the benefit coming from that work history is strong enough, SSDI takes over and SSI goes away. If it's not quite strong enough, we have the same situation again. Johnny's getting more money from SSDI, but he still keeps enough SSI to make up the difference to what he would be getting if he were only on SSI. Now, let's say a few more years go by and Johnny's second parent retires. And if that parent has a stronger work history, Johnny can now start to get SSDI based instead of the first parent on the second parent's work history. He's not going to get it on both parents, just on whoever has the strongest work history. And Johnny can keep that SSDI benefit of 50% of the parent's retirement benefit for the rest of the parent's life. And when the parent dies, it kicks up to 75% of the parent's retirement benefit. And Johnny can keep that for the rest of his life, provided that one thing does not happen. And that one thing is that Johnny starts to consistently have what's called substantial gainful activity. In other words, it's possible for Johnny to work himself off SSDI and lose his disabled adult child status. And so this is why we need to be careful. It is not at all uncommon for me to see somebody who's getting SSDI of, say, $1,100 a month. And they've got earned income based on their own work of $1,400 a month. Well, the two of them together, they're taking home $2,500 a month. Now, substantial gainful activity in 2025 is $1,620 a month. And if you get it once, it's not going to throw you off SSDI. There's a process, right? But if you consistently start to make over substantial gainful activity for long enough, it is possible to lose your SSDI. And so there's kind of a donut hole, right? Let's say if substantial gainful activity is 1620 and Johnny's now consistently making 1700 and he does this for long enough, he loses his 1100 a month in SSDI and now his income's gone down from 2500 a month to 1700 a month. So the question is, do you think Johnny can make up the donut hole? Because if he can, more power to them, and he should, right? But if you don't think that Johnny can consistently earn enough income to make up what he was making with the combination of his earned income and the SSDI, think long and hard about taking on those extra hours, especially since I see a lot of people who can be the employee of the month at 20 hours a week, and at 30 hours a week, they get fired because it's just too stressful. And so you need to be careful. Now, once you've been on SSDI for 2 years, you start to receive Medicare, which is great. It's a great insurance program. But again, it cannot be used for long-term services and supports. And if the person started out on SSI and moved on to SSDI, and that increase in income is the only reason that their income went above the cutoff for mass health, they can keep their mass health as well as having their Medicare and be what are called dual eligibles. But if the SSDI the person is going to get based on mom or dad's retirement benefit is above the mass health income cutoff, and mom or dad is looking at retiring before Johnny turns 18, they might want to hold off until after Johnny turns 18 so Johnny can take advantage of that. Ooh, I moved from SSI to SSDI, but I was already on SSI as an adult. I'm not going to lose my mass health. Having said that, it is not completely bleak because some of the regulations around common health changed in the last 2 years. And now, if a person is at or below 138% of the federal poverty limit, they can be on mass health. And if they have a disability and they're above 138% of the federal poverty limit, they can get common health. And common health will also pay for long-term services and supports. Okay, now the last benefit I'm going to mention on this page is EAEDC, which stands for Emergency Aid to Elderly, Disabled, and Children. And it is a Massachusetts cash benefit for people with disabilities, including lawfully present non-citizens who have housing expenses and don't qualify for SSI or SSDI. It's not a lot of money. It maxes out at, I think, like $410 a month if you're not working, and it gets reduced by certain amounts if you are working. And it's sort of a pain in the neck because they make you reapply for Social Security every year and continue to get rejected. That's where the emergency piece comes in. But it is certainly better than nothing. And one of the advantages of it is that, like being on SSI or SSDI, you don't have to meet a work requirement if you are on food stamps. Okay, so I'm going to stop here for a moment because this slide is really dense, and I'm going to take any questions people may have up until now. And feel free to just unmute and yell.
How does it change if you have guardianship? My name's
It
Abby.
doesn't. Guardianship has nothing to do with it. Okay. I think I'm seeing somebody talking, but I'm not hearing anything, but it doesn't look like they're muted. You're labeled Christopher, you're waving at me, but I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yay. Sorry, it's Mara. He was the last one to use it. He is 27. He is on disability,
So SSDI.
but SSDI, but he could be under my husband's survivor benefit type thing. He was in process. I didn't know he could go on that. That was something I found out after.
Oh, so
So should I
this
make an
is one of those
appointment to
things where you probably need to talk to the Social Security office,
Okay. That's what
which
I just told him. I said we need to make an
right,
appointment to
you need to make an appointment because it's quite it's a math problem, right? I mean, you need to look at how much is he getting right now and how much would he be getting if he were on your husband's survivor benefits.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Going back to the screen share. All right. Okay. Mass health must be used for services, and mass health for long-term services and supports comes in two flavors. What are called waiver services, and waiver services can have caps on the number of people who receive them, and there can be waiting lists. And the other way that long-term services and supports are covered is through what are called state plan services. And as of right now, those are an entitlement. And the reason I say as of right now is occasionally you'll hear Congress talking about capitation of Medicaid or block granting of Medicaid. And if either of those were to go through, we would probably start to see waiting lists and caps on the number of people receiving what are now entitlements of state plan services. The other thing I need to mention here is that state plan services are different in every state. Medicaid is like a cafeteria plan. Each state decides what it wants to offer in its cafeteria and it gets approval from the feds. And so, for example, one of the state plan services I'm about to talk about, AFC, is an entitlement in Massachusetts, but it's a waiver service in Texas, therefore with waiting lists. Okay, so I'm going to talk about three state plan services, and there are more than these three state plan services, but these are the three that impact the ability to provide support in a living situation. So I'm not going to talk about things like dehabilitation, which don't have anything to do with the living situation. And the three I'm going to talk about are AFC, PCA, and group adult foster care. And AFC can stand for either adult family care or adult foster care. In either case, it is a program that pays a stipend to a caregiver who lives in the same legal unit as the person for whom they are caring. And it's pretty straightforward. It's called adult family care if that caregiver is a family member, and it's called adult foster care if that caregiver is not a family member. If the person is living in the family home, you have to use adult family care. You can't, say hire somebody to move into your house and be the adult foster care provider. And the amount of the stipend is about $27 a day or $53 a day, depending on whether the person is level 1 AFC or level 2 AFC. And level 1 means the person needs at least prompting with one activity of daily living. So the first question is what's an activity of daily living? And the second question is what's a prompt? So activities of daily living are things like bathing, dressing, toileting, eating, mobility, transferring in and out of a wheelchair, and what's called other hygiene. Excuse me, other hygiene, which is things like toothbrushing. Um, and Prompting is different from a reminder. If you can say, Johnny, go take a shower, and he does it and does it correctly, that's a reminder, not a prompt. If you need to say, turn the water on, get your hair wet, let's get the shampoo, you need to rinse the shampoo out, those are prompts. In terms of eating is eating. It's not food preparation. So eating is, do you need to cut their meat up for them? Do you need to put the food in their mouth? It doesn't have to always be as much as putting the food in their mouth, but it could be, for example, my son thinks half a pork chop is one bite, and he will choke if left to his own devices. So he needs somebody to, at the very least, cue him to cut his food smaller. And level 2 is the person needs physical assistance. So that would be cutting the meat up into bite-sized pieces for 3 ADLs or more, or 2 ADLs if there is also a maladaptive behavior present. And that might include anything from resisting care up through aggression. And the AFC provider must live in the same legal unit as the person for whom they are providing care, and they cannot be a legal guardian. So what this tends to mean is that one parent becomes a guardian and the other one becomes the caregiver. Is this unfair to single parent households? Absolutely. Have people been trying to fix this for years with the legislature? Yes. Have we succeeded yet? No. But the thing to remember is that it's only full guardianship that is a bar. So some people are able to do things like a combination of power of attorney and fiscal conservatorship and still be the AFC caregiver. Others, they might have the guardian be a sibling who's over 18 and the parent becomes the caregiver. As a practical matter, you cannot access food stamps if a person is on AFC. There's some extremely unusual exceptions to that, but as a practical matter, you can't do it. And I know that some people have been told by their AFC agencies to apply for food stamps, but they should not have been told that. And my personal motto is if you're digging a hole, stop digging. My biggest fear is that, the feds are going to come after people and say, you owe us for 10 years of food stamps that you weren't supposed to be getting. Um, so now, a concern about AFC is that if the person with the disability, and this is not an issue with adult family care, but it's very much an issue with adult foster care. If the person with a disability is living in the home of a caregiver, and it is purely that they basically moved into the guest room at the caregiver's house, this is all fine. But if the person with the disability is living in a place of their own, where either they are controlling the housing with a housing voucher or a family member owns it or an agency owns it, this is considered by the U.S. Department of Labor to be an employment relationship, which means that the caregiver has to get paid minimum wage with time and a half after 40 hours. And there is absolutely nothing about $27 a day that says minimum wage with time and a half after 40 hours. So how do people address this? One thing to bear in mind is that an adult foster care provider is allowed to care for up to 3 people with disabilities at level 1 or 2 people with disabilities at level 2, and they get multiple stipends. They also, if their rent is free, that the value of the rent counts towards the compensation package. Um, and finally, they don't have to be paid for hours when they're asleep if they can sleep at least 5 straight hours. And they also don't have to get paid for time when the person is, off at a day program, for example. Now, some people have tried to get around this whole thing by trying to make the adult foster care provider an independent contractor. I'm not sure how well those arrangements will hold up in court if you get a disgruntled former adult foster care provider who wants to make an issue of it. Personal care attendant is a program that pays a caregiver to provide care to someone who needs physical assistance with 2 or more ADLs. And unlike the AFC provider, the PCA does not have to live with the person. They could be dropping in. But similarly to AFC, the provider cannot be a guardian. And also there's this whole issue of minimum wage with time and a half after 40 hours. The PCA program is paying $19.50 an hour now, going to $20 an hour in July. And the way it works is a bit different from AFC. What happens is an assessment is done, dividing the day up into 15-minute segments, and they assess how many segments per day the person needs care for. They add up those segments to get a number of hours in a day, and then they calculate the number of hours in a week. And that is the hours you are allotted. It is illegal to pay a person more than the PCA rate. It is also illegal to pay them for additional hours beyond what they are budgeted for. If you hire a PCA, you need to ask them if they are working more than 40 hours a week between you and other clients, because again, that time and a half after 40 hours kicks in, and you're going to need a waiver from Mass Health if they are working more than 40 hours a week as a PCA. And then next is group adult foster care. And it pays about $1,324 a month. The person must need at least prompting for at least one ADL, and it is not designed to be a person who lives there. It is designed to cover 1 to 2 hours a day of drop-in services. And it can only be used in assisted living or in other housing served by a GAFC provider agency, which is usually subsidized housing where the subsidy is attached to the property. So state elderly housing, for example. Okay. So this group adult foster care has also occasionally been used by certain agencies, specialized housing and Mainstay come to mind, to create group living situations where there is a caregiver who lives on site and is there in case of emergencies. And so what they're essentially doing is they've got 8 to 12 people with disabilities living there, and they're adding up their 1 to 2 hours a day to be able to cover that person. But a person still has to be able to be left alone for 6 hours at a time, because there's nobody there from say 2:30 in the 8:30 in the morning to 2:30 in the afternoon. And so if your person had to stay home sick from a day program or a job, for instance, there wouldn't be any staff there. Okay, so I am also going to stop now for additional questions. This is the second of 3 slides where we're going to stop for questions, and after that, we're going to barrel through to the end.
Hi, Kathy.
Hey.
Question for you. How are families to know that that the AFC member is not eligible for SNAP benefits if the DTA is not asking families that question?
A good question. A fair question. And it's one nobody should be raising with DTA for the simple reason that we don't want some huge investigation of everybody who's been on SNAP, right? But but the reality is the regulations are very clear.
No, I agree. Regulations typically aren't accessible to most families. I know they're
Right.
out there, but you have to find it.
You have to find them. And honestly, the problem is that there hasn't been sufficient training of the AFC agencies by DTA, or those agencies haven't reached out to DTA. But, this is, aside from the fact that when you read the regulations, it's very clear.
Yeah.
I also know this for a fact because a number of years ago, I was on a panel with a guy from SNAP at the transition conference. And he said, absolutely, positively, no, you can't use this with AFC. The only way to use SNAP with AFC is if the caregiver is also on SNAP and elects to include the person with a disability as part of their SNAP household.
Right.
And they will almost never do that. And the reason they will almost never do that is because if they don't include the person as part of their household, the AFC benefit is not considered to be income for the person purposes of calculating SNAP eligibility and benefits. But if they include the person in their household, the AFC stipend is considered to be part of their income for calculating eligibility and benefits, and they may not be eligible at all, or they may take a huge whack in the amount of SNAP they get. And so they're not going to do it.
I just think DTA needs to start asking the question. It's so unfair to families that
Oh, totally.
they don't know this and they could potentially have an issue down the line.
Exactly. Exactly.
Thank you.
Cathy?
Yes.
This is Phil. I'm on AFC and I'm getting 753 a month. I think I'm on level one.
Mhm.
And I have to actually walk my son. This could change maybe in the future. And in fact, it didn't even used to be the case. But ever since I've been on this, I've had to walk my son, physically help my son to do certain things because he freezes. He refuses to do them. This is daily. So does that technically put me on level two?
It may. I think you should ask for a reassessment, especially
Yeah,
if
I
it's
will.
something that wasn't initially true when he first qualified.
I think it was true, but I think it wasn't impressed on them. I'll have to figure it out.
Yeah, no, it's worth revisiting. And I'm not going to presume to know what your son's diagnosis is, but certainly there's a fair number of people with autism who have autistic catatonia who can freeze. And
Yeah,
I
he has been diagnosed that way. Yes.
Yeah, so that's a formal diagnosis, and you can clearly demonstrate that, right? So, that's physical assistance. And so because if it's related to catatonia, that may be across a number of different kinds of living skills. It's not going to be confined to just one, right?
Right.
So I would definitely go back and push on that because that's
Yeah,
a
I will.
significant amount of money to leave on the table.
Yes. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, anybody else before I go on to housing vouchers? Let's go on to housing vouchers because we're falling behind. I'm too wordy. Okay, so the portable Section 8 voucher must be used for housing. The way it works is that a person pays 30% of income in rent to a landlord, and the difference between that and what is called the contract rent is paid directly to the landlord with funds with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. This is not a Section 8 apartment. This is an apartment on which you are paying rent using a portable voucher. You can think of it as being like a coupon. It does not affect SSI or mass health benefits. Depending on where you live, the wait can be anywhere from 5 to 14 years, but on average it's about 10 to 12. The person can apply at 18. And under federal law, once they get it, they have 60 days to use it or lose it. But some housing authorities automatically give a little bit more, and most will usually give you an extension for a person with a disability. This is not an indefinite extension. It's usually going to max out by 6 months. A person with a disability can receive a 2-bedroom voucher if they need an aide to live with them, but the aide cannot be a close family member. A cousin might be okay, for example. Having a family member be the landlord can be permitted as a reasonable accommodation for disability, but the person renting must live in a legal separate unit. We have a separate website aside from our main website, which is just about affordable and subsidized housing applications. And that website is 18section8.org. Obviously, our main website is the one at the bottom of the screen, autismhousingpathways.org. Now, Section 8 is not the only game in town. There are other forms of affordable and subsidized housing. There's the Massachusetts Rental Voucher Program, which has both site-based apartments and portable vouchers. There's the Alternative Housing Voucher Program, which is just for younger adults with disabilities, and it's a portable voucher. State elderly housing in Massachusetts reserves 13.5% of its units for younger adults 18 to 59 with disabilities. You don't get kicked out at 60. They just change what category you're in. Federal elderly housing sometimes, but not always, reserves units for younger adults with disabilities. There is project-based family housing, state or federal, and this can include Section 8 housing. So in that case, the Section 8 is attached to the apartment, not the person. There is private affordable housing, who are landlords who got tax credits usually to set aside units at lower price points. There is single room occupancy. This is, the classic example of this is renting a room at the YMCA. Most of the YMCAs now run their housing programs through a local housing authority. Affordable assisted living. Again, the challenge is finding one that will take a younger person. And with older adults, rest homes, which look a lot like nursing homes from the outside, but they're different and the person can come and go freely. But they are available for people who need prompting and with at least one ADL. They're only affordable if the person's only income is SSI or EAEDC, but in that case, they are affordable. We have a housing search and application grid at this site. We have detailed information on how to apply for housing at 18section8.org. Make sure you click on other ways to apply for housing. There's a spreadsheet to track your applications in the document library, sample completed applications in the document library, and the site dovetails with the housing search and application grid. This is where I would usually stop to take more questions, but because we're behind schedule and because I'm going to do an entire other presentation on this, I think it's next month, I'm gonna hold on that for the moment. I'll take questions on this at the end if you have them, but I'm just gonna keep going right now. Okay, so we're back here, and I just want to hit escape for a moment so I can read my notes. Food stamps tend to pay about $218 a month, but can be as high as $291. If the person is living at home with you and they're not on AFC, they can apply to create their own food stamp household at $22. They just have to buy and prepare their food substantially separately, which basically means 50% of their meals. If somebody has the utilities in their name, there can be a 30% discount on electricity if the person is on public benefits. Comcast has an Internet Essentials plan for $9.95 a month for people on public benefits. And occasionally you will see if a person has their own subsidized apartment, for example, occasionally I have seen DDS let people use their self-direction budget to get reimbursed for their utilities. DDS is not going to pay rent, but for people who aren't in a group home, but they will occasionally let you use your self-direction dollars to pay for utilities. Now, there is a federal program that will pay for free cell phone service. The one most people heard of is SafeLink. But there are others. Insurance Wireless is another one. It's for a person with a disability or elderly who's on public benefits, and there can only be one per household. Um, and and DDS, individual support hours, can be used by people who have their own place to live outside the family home who do not require 24/7 supports. Okay, so let me just keep going. I'm going to go back to. Okay, so what are some ways to control property? You could convert your basement or garage into an apartment. And I need to change this slide from be aware of zoning to now just say you're going to need a building permit. And why am I making that change? Because as of February 1st, the Governor's Affordable Homes Act allows accessory dwelling units as a by right use in single family zoning. There may be height and setback requirements, but they can't just say you can't do it at all. And similarly, add on an accessory apartment, but be aware of zoning. Or, sorry, you'll need a building permit. Most families, their wealth is tied up in the equity in their own home. So for a lot of people, creating a housing strategy for their family member is going to be connected to their own downsizing. So what does this look like? A classic example is the family that sells their house and buys 2 condos, or they sell their house and buy a 2 or 3 family. And that third unit might be for rental income, handy in case you're dealing with the Department of Labor regulation. Or maybe 2 families buy together. So mom and dad A are in unit A, mom and dad B in unit B, and kids A and B with a caregiver in unit C. The individual could, if their income is high enough to qualify for a mortgage, enter a first-time homebuyer lottery. Families could buy a condo or a house either alone or with other families. So what are some possible, what does this look like? What are some things this could look like? Liam applies for an apartment in state senior housing and gets in after 3 years. He uses group adult foster care to pay for 2 hours a day of services. Anna gets a fixed amount from her family every month, which she combines with her own funds to get an apartment in private affordable housing. Raj gets on the Section 8 waiting list at 18, waits 10 years for a voucher. When Raj gets his voucher, his family uses a 0% interest deferred payment loan from the Home Modification Loan Program, combined with a home equity loan, to convert the garage to an apartment. Raj uses individual support hours from DDS. Ben gets on the Section 8 waiting list at 18, waits 10 years for a voucher. While waiting, his mother is his AFC provider, his father is his guardian. Mom saves some of the AFC stipend for 10 years, acquiring money for a security deposit, furniture, and appliances. Yes, I did say security deposit. The voucher pays your current month's rent, but it's not going to pay the last month's rent or the security deposit. When Ben gets his voucher, he moves into a rental house with 2 friends who also receive AFC. That means that caregiver is getting 3 stipends and free rent. An AFC provider moves in with Ben and his friends. Sue gets on the Section 8 waiting list at 18, waits 10 years for a voucher. While waiting, her mother is her adult family care provider and her father is her guardian. Mom saves the AFC stipend for 10 years, acquiring $90,000 to use as a down payment. When she gets her voucher, her parents buy a condo, and she uses the voucher to pay them rent. Her parents use the rent to pay the mortgage. By the way, there's a program through Fannie Mae where parents can qualify as owner occupiers even if they're not going to live there if they're buying a home for their family member with a disability. This allows them to get 5% down and owner occupier interest rates. An adult foster care provider moves in with Sue. Sue's parents retire and Sue moves on to SSDI, increasing her income. I'm going to go over the asset issue very quickly because we are short on time. I am not a financial planner, but I know you're going to need to talk to one as well as talking to a lawyer. You can't have assets in the person's name. Make sure other family members know this. You do not want Great Aunt Ruth to kick off and leave $9,000 and Billy loses his eligibility for PCA. This is not good. But the person can be the beneficiary of an ABLE account, which is kind of like a 529 college savings account, but it is for disability related expenses. And you can have up to $100,000 in an ABLE account. up to $19,000 a year can go into it from every source. I think it's 19,000 this year. It might still be 18. So in other words, that's not each person could put 19,000 into it. It's like coming from all sources, a total of 19,000 can go into it in a year. You can find information on the Fidelity website or at the ABLE National Resource Center website. And ABLE accounts are special needs, and special needs trusts are about to be really, really important because there's a regulation coming down this year that says anybody with assets of $100,000 or more is not eligible for Section 8. Unless those assets are in an ABLE account, an IRA, or a special needs trust. Now, remember, we are not talking about mom and dad's assets. We're talking about what the individual can access. All right, so special needs trusts are another exception to the rule. There are two kinds: third party, which is funded by money other than that of the person with a disability, and self-funded, funded by money that belongs to the person with a disability. The classic example of the latter is if there's a child support payment involved. And individual development accounts, I'm going to skip over altogether because I've never actually seen anybody actually use one, and they're complicated and we're short on time. Quick final note on ABLE accounts and special needs trusts. Both the self-funded special needs trust and the ABLE account have what are called a clawback provision. And that means when the person with a disability dies, if there's any money left in the ABLE account or the self-funded special needs trust, Medicaid can claw that money back to reimburse itself for money that was spent by Medicaid on the person. Whereas money that's left in a third-party special needs trust can go straight to a residual heir. Sometimes what you will find happening is you'll find parents who create a special needs trust, but they don't put any money in it. And they set things up so that when the second parent dies, the special needs trust is funded. And frequently you'll see people buy extra life insurance for that purpose. You'll see people who have both special needs trusts and ABLE accounts. You'll see people moving money from the special needs trust into the ABLE account. And there are a variety of reasons for this, but again, I'm not giving financial advice here. Skills are really important. About 40%, 40 to 45% of adults with autism have too many skills to qualify for a group home or PCA or AFC, but they don't have enough skills to live independently. And so what that means is, aside from DDS individual supports, you're going to have to pay out of pocket for those, for the remaining supports that are needed. So clearly, the more skills the person has, the less you need to pay out of pocket. And so, and I want you to remember our cheeseburger from our first slide. And so skill development is really important. We have this thing called the Adolescent Autonomy Checklist. You can think of skills as falling into 4 buckets: the skills the person already has, the skills they can acquire, the ones they will always need some help with, and the ones they will need to have done for them. And so you want to figure out what bucket each skill is in and work on moving things from the can learn how bucket into the can do bucket, and practice those skills, develop systems and supports for the skills in buckets 3 and 4. We've got a bunch of resources on living skills on our website. I'm just going to leave that at that. Centers for Independent Living, there's 15 of them in Massachusetts. They can help the person work on living skills. They're entirely outside the DDS system. And housing strategies should reflect a vision. Person-centered planning is a method for your family member to plan a future based on their vision and on circles of supports to help them carry out plans. The letter of intent is a statement by the parents or guardians of their intent for the person's future. And then where do we go from here? We have a turning 18 checklist. We do housing application assistance. We have something called My Benefits Generator to help you figure out the mass health supports for which you might be eligible. We're in the process of upgrading it. but by the end of June, it should be, really whiz bang. Develop a saving strategy, pursue options to improve your person's living skills. We also have an infographic of housing models with funding streams. We have something called Housing in a Month's Worth of Tweets, which is kind of a cheat sheet for today's presentation. When you're ready to develop a housing strategy, consider our 5-part virtual housing workshop. That is fee for service. And have your person complete a free housing workbook. They're at the 8th grade, 1st grade, and picture level. We also do fee for service, person-centered planning as it relates to housing. And that is it. And I'm sorry, Allison, for being a little verbose.
Did great. Are you kidding me? You're amazing. Fantastic.
All right. Any other questions?
Question, Kathy.
Yeah.
Who does this apply to? Individuals who get a site-based voucher and then after a year could qualify for a mobile voucher.
It has to be, the site-based has to be project-based Section 8. There's no other program. So, project-based MRVP cannot be converted to a portable MRVP voucher. You've got to have project-based Section 8 to convert that to the mobile voucher.
Okay, so my daughter is in, I don't even know what to call it, but she's in elderly and disabled housing. So she has a voucher tied to her apartment.
Is it federal or state-funded elderly disabled housing?
I don't know.
That's what you have to find out. Because if it's state, it won't convert.
Okay.
If it's federal, you're going to have to find out from the property manager or the housing authority, is it Section 8 or not? Because if it is project-based Section 8, you can make the request.
Okay. It's run by Cochrane Management. Are you familiar with them?
It might be project-based Section 8 because that's private affordable housing, and they usually put together a stack of capital inputs, and part of that is sometimes project-based Section 8. So I would call Cochrane and ask them.
Okay. So I want to know if it's federal.
Well, first, is it federal or state? But beyond that, even if it is federal, is it Section 8?
Okay.
Because if it's Section 8, what town is it in?
Andover.
Okay. If it's Section 8, I'm assuming that it's the Andover Housing Authority that is controlling that. The other alternative is you could call the Andover Housing Authority. I suppose there's a small chance it might be a different housing authority, but it will probably be Andover. And if it is project-based Section 8 and it's Andover, then you can request in writing the Andover Housing Authority that they convert her voucher to portable. Now, I will tell you right now it's a tall order because there are major cuts to HUD going on. And housing authorities are allowed to say, we can't do this because our budget is a mess. But it's still worth making the request anyway.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Kathy, there's a question. What town has the shortest wait list for voucher?
I don't know definitively, but the short answer is wealthy towns that have portable Section 8 vouchers that are on the centralized waiting list.
Okay, you did have an answer. Very good.
So Concord, Winchester, Wellesley, those would be examples.
Okay. Awesome.
Not Cambridge. Absolutely not Cambridge. Cambridge is not on the centralized waiting list. Cambridge has its own Section 8 waiting list. And it's running 10 to 12 years right now. Weston, I'm not sure if Weston even has Section 8 vouchers. And I'm pretty sure they're not on the centralized waiting list, although I'd have to check to be sure. What people have to remember is that there are over 300 cities and towns in Massachusetts, but only 103 are on the centralized waiting list.
And next time we'll be talking more about that when you come back on April 29th for applying for housing. Am I correct, Kathy?
Yes.
Okay, just so everyone knows that.
Yeah, that will all be about applying and
Okay,
so
everybody,
forth and
that'll
so on.
be yeah, April 29th, 6:30 to 7:30.
Very
Okay,
good.
yeah. Any more questions for Kathy? Well, thank you all for being here this evening. Thank you, oh, yep.
Okay.
Actually, I will thank you. I will thank you, and I'm actually we'll shut the recording off, but we can take that question. Thank you, everybody. I'm gonna